Hi again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of RV Business Capitol Talk, sponsored by Ericsell. I'm Rick Kessler. With me, Sherman Goldenberg, and joining the two of us is Chad Lyon. Chad, of course, is the managing director of Wells Fargo, the Marine and RV segment. Chad, thank you so much for joining us.
Rick, Sherman, awesome to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. Let's talk some business.
Well, that's why we have you on, because Wells Fargo has the pulse of the RV industry's market always at its fingertips. Before we get into the state of the market, maybe just a quick overview of what your segment does for the RV industry.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Rick. So Wells Fargo Distribution Finance does floor plan financing for independent and larger retailers across various segments. RV is one of our most important segments. We're also very active in the marine business, the motorsports business, outdoor power equipment, appliances. So we've got a fairly large business, both U.S., North America, and in Europe, where we finance RVs in all three of those segments. So very familiar with the space, very invested in it, and like the business a ton.
Question from the outset, not most normal year for anybody, probably in any of those categories, for that matter. And yep. What's the landscape look like to you from your vantage point?
So so different spot for each of those markets is they've kind of returned to normal, right? So as the supply and demand trying to match up. Obviously, this industry has been incredibly responsible in the last year of trying to bring shipments in line with retail, right? So that's the obvious backdrop that we all are that serve this business appreciate. We've seen our business activity, so the loan balances we have come down dramatically the selling season. So there has been a lot of liquidation in terms of sales outpacing shipments, which is obvious. The aggregate data, we see that in our local data. There's still probably, from a model year perspective, there's probably still more 22s in the field than would be desirable. I think that seems to be the biggest focus as we talk to our customers, is just trying to move that segment of inventory out. And then obviously focus in on the long-term prospects, which are really, really good for the business. But it's been a little bit of a challenge this year in terms of just trying to balance the shipments with what's actually happened within retail, with obviously other economic headwinds, that interest rates and inflation, other things that are facing our consumers.
Would it be fair to ask you about the mindset of the dealers with whom you work generally?
Yeah.
What do you see in there?
I think we're seeing the mindset of they're trying to make deals, right? They're trying to get things over the curb into the hands of the consumer. I think that there's been various approaches in terms of how they've handled that. As we kind of turned the calendar and started into January, you could see there was activity in some of the early shows that felt like there was good consumer interest. It was just really trying to close that consumer, which I think my mind, just talking to different customers, was more challenging than I think anticipated. Just again, some of the economic headwinds, interest rates in particular, retail interest rates. So I think that they're really, over the last 2 or 3 months, that has gotten much more focused on trying to get the inventory levels both where they want to be, because I think in aggregate, Sherman, in my mind, the inventory levels are not that bad in terms of the aggregate units out. It's the mix of as I said, it's a little bit of the prior model year product that really needs to find consumers, to find a home with the consumer.
Does it seem like the dealers are going to sit tight with inventory until maybe even open house, so blow through the inventory that they do have now before they order again?
That feels very much that I think there are certainly opportunistic things that are happening within dealers as they're getting short on certain very hot models, excuse me. Yeah. So we still see in interactions with dealers, there's still some focus on acquiring new inventory, but I would say that's much less versus just dealing with what's there, and then focusing on in August, September, what the what the new offerings are going to be, and then how that, what open house is going to present those opportunities to acquire new products. So it's I would say the vast majority are really focused on that in terms of acquiring new product.
If you had a room full of dealers, nameless, mind
Yep.
you, when you asked them for their prognosis or prognoses, plural, and what do you think they'd tell you? Where things play out, how things play out?
So the dealers that we have been, so if I had a room of the dealers that I've interacted with, they would be more pessimistic than I am. I think they feel like there's still a longer tail to what's happening in the segment than I probably even do. So I think I feel like this has been a very specific kind of rebalance of inventory levels that I feel like we're closer to the end than the beginning, obviously. I would say they would think we're still in a little bit more of the middle. So I do feel like there's a little bit more pessimism, which is probably long term probably healthy, but there's a little bit more pessimism, I would say, than I would have just sitting back looking at it in aggregate, about where we're at, kind of where we're at in the cycle.
I would ask you to compare this to the last downturn, but it occurs to me that you didn't experience the last downturn, not in this business.
I did not. I was in the distribution finance business, but I was not in the RV business. But I can tell you there's no comparison. There's very little comparison in terms of the way the industry's handled the shipments, the way the dealers have handled trying to incentivize retail, and then obviously all the macroeconomic things with the banking failures, housing crisis, all that. This doesn't feel like that at all.
If Chad, go ahead, Rick.
No.
If Chad Lyon was going to make his own prediction as a Wells Fargo guy, but still Chad Lyon, how do you see this thing turning time wise? Yeah.
I mean, I would say this: there's still a lot of economic headwinds. The bank, as the Wells Fargo bank, still feels like there is going to be there's still headwinds from the rise in interest rates. That we're probably the second half or the first half of next year. There's probably going to be some negative prints on the GDP, right? So the bank still feels like there's a little bit more to come. I tend to look at it this way: is there's been kind of pockets of, call it recessionary activity, look at housing, and I'd say look at RV. So I would think that we probably have kind of had that moment, and I would say more optimistically that we would think that as interest rates come down, so what the slowing in the economy, in my mind, brings long-term interest rates down. That's the forecast the bank has. If long-term interest rates start to come down and the Fed is on hold, I think you're starting to see a little bit of an incentive, a retail incentive. So I think that we could be positioned for a good 24. So I do think there's still a lot of economic uncertainty, but for this industry, I think it's having its proverbial moment right now. I feel like there's still so much demand for outdoor activities. There's still so much camping. I mean, there's just so many things that, from a demographic standpoint, you just feel like this is a moment, and that there's with a little help from interest rates, probably you're looking at a bottoming and an upward trend that we'd seen before COVID.
We hear time and again that the market itself, including the so-called new RVers, who the industry picked up in the pandemic era, that there's strength there. And you talk to dealers every day. Does that appear to be the case?
Yes. There still seems to be a ton of interest. I mean, the events that we were at, that we've been at this year, between shows and dealer. I mean, there does not seem to be a lack of interest in the product and the lifestyle. That does not. And we talk a lot, as a bank, right? As a financial institution, there's a lot of education on these various segments, and that's one thing that we talk about the business a lot. We talk about just the long-term demographics are so good because the people want to be outdoors. The camping, there's a lot of positive things for the business. So I don't see any of that. I've not seen any of that kind of wane from what we see talking to dealers or anything.
That's
Rick?
one of the, I'm glad you mentioned that, Chad, because the tailwinds seem to be ever present. They really, truly do. Back to the Peter Marizzi, you guys sponsored bringing him into the Power Breakfast. Thank you again for that.
No problem.
Also, thank you for again sponsoring the Top 50 program. But Peter
You're welcome.
Marizzi had it's a weird question because you've got Peter Marizzi saying probably a Q1, Q2 soft landing. But that seems to be the consensus is there is no consensus. Everybody has their own opinion. Everyone's going to point to one particular data point. We were just at RVs Move America Week. That economist had quite a rosy picture to paint. Have you ever seen it where just it's such a mixed bag of opinion?
Never. I mean, when you talk about Peter, so even introducing Peter, I've never seen more demand for economic insights from customers. We are being asked all the time for what's Wells Fargo's update on this? Can we get someone to participate in this event? I mean, there is just a lot of demand for economics because it's a really unique time. If you think about it, everyone wants to look at the inflation and go back to the 70s, right? And that's the point, but there was such a different economy then to where we are now. There's so much more transparency what's happening in the economy and in the Fed because of social media, the 24-hour news cycle. So there's just so many things that are coming at people that I think people want something that simplifies the view. And I do think that when we talk about economics, we try very hard to just look, the bank is kind of guiding here. So this is kind of the way that they're thinking about, whether it's interest rates, whether it's GDP, whether it's inflation. So we're really trying to be kind of just clear and just simple because that's helpful. But to your point, we can be clear and simple, but there's 6, 7, 8, 10 different banks with different viewpoints. And I mean, this one, the resilience of this economy has been incredible. The market's been, and the stock market, the labor market have been really strong. So I think all those are good tailwinds for the space. Once the inventory levels and composition get kind of right sized, but no, I've never seen anything like this in my time with the uncertainty, the questions, and then the demand for insights.
And you were saying the RV segment really compares similarly to power sports and marine?
It does. The supply chains in RV corrected through COVID materially faster. The OEMs here were materially better positioned to have throughput than the motorsports and marine businesses. So they're both, in my mind, probably a year behind in terms of their inventory recoveries. I mean, obviously I'm very close to the boat business. They really got back to what I would consider normal inventories this spring. And they're having a little bit of the same, you're back to normal inventories, and then you've got all these economic headwinds, you've got higher interest rates. So they're having a little bit of the same, trying to figure out what is the right level of inventories based on what the forward demand is. So those, and the motorsports is actually even a little bit behind that. So the industries are a little bit behind in their inventory recoveries. So they're in a little bit of a different spots, but there was a lot of similarities the last few years in terms of kind of peak, spike in demand, spike and then trying to recover in supply, and now kind of a little bit of an abating of demand and trying to then rematch that with the right level of supply.
You're really well spoken, and I'm very impressed. Had you given any thought to running for office? Given all of our current presidential candidates, I think there's still room.
There's no lack of interest for the spot, but that would not be. I'm not very good at it. I don't like bad news very much.
All right, Rick. Should we let him off the hook here?
Let you off the hook, but just to summarize, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chad, it sounds like we're doing just fine. We'll get through what we need to get through, and we're going to come out of it just fine.
I mean, that is my view. Is we're it is a very hard moment in a very long-term healthy industry. So this is just a moment we got to collectively get through. But the actions that are being taken by the on the supply side and now on the retail side are fantastic. I think there will be a very bright other side here shortly.
With that,
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
thank you, Chad,
No,
for
thank-
joining us. Thanks, RVers for sponsoring it. And Chad, we'll see you soon, I'm sure.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it a lot. This was fun.
So do we. Thank you.
Thank you.